Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Carlos. I'm a web developer based in Brooklyn, New York, and today we're going to work on a project called Hacking the Fender from the Learn Python 3 course. Now, in order to complete this project, you should be comfortable with working with lists, working with loops, working with modules, dictionaries, and files. We're going to be working with two specific modules for this project, the JSON module and the CSV module. If you're unfamiliar with those, that's okay. Feel free to take a look at the documentation. If you go ahead to docs.python.org/3, you'll find a very extensive documentation for a lot of these modules and other functions that we're going to be working with. All right, so without further ado, let's go ahead and get started. Okay, so this is Hacking the Fender. So let's go ahead and take a look at what we're going to be doing today. So the Fender is apparently a notorious computer hacker and a general villain, and has retrieved a bunch of top secret passwords, including our own. So we need to do three things. First, we got to access the Fender systems and update his passwords.txt file, which contains all of our passwords. We're going to have to scramble that secret data. And then we're also going to add a signature of /null, which is a different hacker who's basically a threat to the Fender. So we're going to use the knowledge we've been building up through the previous lessons, and we're going to be able to retrieve the files, manipulate them in certain ways, and then we're going to actually update the certain data and display it differently. So we're going to be working mostly with CSV values. A lot of Excel files are formatted in this way, and Python is very handy and useful to use with Excel files and CSV files in general. So let's go ahead and get started with step one. Let's see. Okay, reading in the passwords. Okay, so if you actually open up the little folder icon at the top, you'll see the two files we have. We have the CSV file actually here. So you can see we have comma separated values, and we have an empty script file that we're going to be adding stuff onto. So the first thing we actually need to do is, since we already know we have a CSV file, we need to actually import the CSV module, since we're going to be using that to actually parse the data. And the CSV module basically implements a bunch of classes to read and write tabular data in CSV format. So it's used a lot in with Excel files, for example. So all we need to do is simply just type import CSV at the top, and then we can actually use that model right off the bat. Okay, let's move on to step number 2. Okay, so we're actually going to create a list of all the users whose passwords have been compromised, and we're going to be storing that list in a variable called compromised users. So let's go ahead and set up the variable name compromised users to an empty list for now. We'll do that at the top here. Okay, let's move on to step 3. Okay, so next thing we're going to do is we're actually going to open up the file itself, and we're going to be able to do certain function calls on it to manipulate the file. So in order to do this, we can simply use with open. So in Python, we need to give access to a file by opening it. So we can do it by using the open function, and open will return a file object which has a bunch of methods and attributes for getting information about and manipulating the open file. So the with statement creates a context manager, and inside that context manager, we can actually write some code, because without it, we'd actually be writing it in separate lines, and it can get a little bit messy. So with open context creates a specific context manager, so we can write the code for that particular file. So let's go ahead and type in with, and then we'll call the function open, and we'll grab the name of the file that we're going to be working with, which is called passwords.csv. .csv, and we're going to be referring to this file object as password file. So let's make sure to pass the keyword as password file and add a colon there. So now this will be the context manager. Right within this block, we can manipulate the file as we wish, and it will close off as soon as we're done with the context manager. Okay, so let's move on to step number 4. Okay, so for step number 4, we are actually going to pass a password file object holder to a CSV reader, which we can actually grab from the module itself, and then we're going to actually parse it and then save the read file as a variable called, as an object called password CSV. So the CSV module has a bunch of functions. Dict reader would be one, which basically creates an object out of the information that's grabbed from the CSV file. And it creates an object, or as we call it in Python, a dictionary, which uses the first line as its key value pairs. So it grabs the values right here on the first line and creates keys from that. So the property username will be created, and then the property password will be created. And then it will grab each consequenting line and assign each value to that key property. So if it doesn't have that, you actually have to specify it as a parameter inside CSV dict reader. So first thing we're going to do, we're going to create a variable called password underscore CSV, and we're going to set that equal to CSV.dictReader, and we're going to pass in the password file. So in this case, we actually have the names of the columns on the first line, and usually with files like this, you'd probably have the key properties here, the definitions. If you don't, you just have to specify them by passing another parameter here. But since it has it, we don't need to do that. So we can just create a variable and store that, and this will create a JSON object from the actual CSV file. Okay, let's move on to step number 5. Okay, now we actually want to iterate through each of the lines in the CSV file. And to do that, we're going to create a for loop and save each row of the CSV into a temporary variable called password row. So in order to create a loop, we're simply going to use a for in loop. So we'll use for password row, and this will refer to each line inside the CS file in password file. Sorry, password CSV, since we actually created the variable here. And then here we can just print out password row, and this will give us each row contained inside the CSV file. And since we use dict reader, it created a dictionary containing the key, property, password, and username to their values as well. So now we have basically all the users and their key properties, which have both their username and the password values. So dict reader came in very handy in this case. Okay, let's move on to step number 6 here. So inside our for loop, we're now going to print the username, and this will just be the username of the person whose password was compromised. So let's go ahead and instead of just printing the row, let's specify that we want the username, and let's go ahead and print that. And we'll see that we have all the users who actually got their passwords compromised. Okay, it's looking good so far. Let's move on to step number 7. Okay, so we're going to get rid of this print statement since we won't really need it. And then we're going to add each username to the list of compromised users on line 3 here. So we can use .append on the list method to actually add the usernames into that list. So instead of just printing that out, I'm going to go ahead and get rid of that in a second, but I'll do compromised users. Let me copy paste this here, .append, and then we can simply pass each user into the list and append it right here. And then we can get rid of this printing statement. So we can go ahead and save that. And there we go. Now if we actually get out of the context manager, the context block here we can actually print out compromised users to make sure it worked. And you should get a list of all the usernames like we do just here. Okay, it's looking good so far. I'll get rid of this print statement as well. And we'll move on to step number 8. Okay, for step number 8, we're actually going to exit this context management block, and we're going to create a new one. And instead of actually reading a file, we're actually going to write a file this time. So let's go ahead and open up a new with block, and we're going to open it and call this file compromised users text.txt, and we can simply write into a file by passing in a second parameter to the open function and just pass in w as a string, and you'll be able to write into this file. So we're going to refer to this file as a compromised user file. So compromised user file, and then this opens up the context management block. Okay, let's go ahead and save that and move on to step number 9. So inside this new context management block that we just opened, we are going to create a new loop, and we're going to iterate over each of our compromised users. So we're going to call this for compromised users, compromised user in compromised users. We're going to do something here. So make sure you actually label this correctly, or you might get confused with the many compromised user name tags here. So remember, compromised users is being referred to this list here, not the actual file itself. Okay, let's move on to step number 10 now. Okay, so what we want to do with this file is actually insert all these usernames that we had printed earlier into this text file, so we know which users are compromised. So we can simply write this into our compromised users.txt file by calling in the .write function. So let's refer to the file we just created. Remember, we have it labeled here. So we can call this .write on that file, and then we can simply pass in each user. Since we're looping over all the users through a list, we can actually refer to each user as compromised user, and that should write us the file. So let's go ahead and move on forward. You can go ahead and save this as well. And if you actually open up your little folder icon here at the top, you'll see that a new users list was actually created here. Okay, let's exit out of that block as it says in step 11. And then we'll move on to step 12, where we're actually going to be notifying the boss of what we've done. So in step 12, your boss needs to know that you were successful in retrieving that compromised data. Now we'll need to send him an encoded message over the internet. So we're going to use JSON to do that. And in order to use a JSON module, we actually have to import it here. So let's import it to the top, import JSON. Now, JSON stands for JavaScript Object Notation. If you're familiar with JavaScript, this will look very familiar to you. It's still very similar to Python. It's basically the way JavaScript kind of transfers data in a very lightweight manner using objects, which we kind of refer to them as dictionaries in our case. So with the JSON module that we just imported, we could do a lot of things with that module. In this case, we're actually going to convert certain stuff or dictionaries into JSON format and actually dump it into a file. Okay, so after importing the JSON module, let's move on to step 13. So similar to what we just did with our compromised users text file, we're going to do the same, but instead of using a text file, we're going to be using JSON. So let's open up a new context management block. Let's use open as well, and we'll pass in boss message JSON, and we're going to be writing into this file. So let's add a parameter of W to that. So with open, let's pass in the name of the file we're actually going to be writing, and then pass in the W flag here. And we're going to refer to this as boss message. And let's open up our content block here. Okay, let's move on to step 14. So in step 14, we're going to create a Python dictionary object, and we're going to pass in certain keys and properties here. We're going to pass recipient as a key with a value of the boss, and message with a value of mission success. So let's create a variable called boss message dict. Let's set it equal to the following key properties and values. So recipient is going to be the boss. Another one will be message, and we'll say mission success. Okay, let's go ahead and save that, and we'll move on to step 15. Okay, in step 15, we're simply going to write out the boss message dict to boss message, and we're going to use .dump in with the JSON module. Now, .dump takes two positional arguments. One would be the data object to be serialized, or in this case, to be changed into a JSON object. And the two will be the file-like object to which the bytes will be written, which will be for us the file we're actually writing. So we're simply going to call JSON dump and then pass in the parameters we actually wrote. So let's call JSON dump here below our dictionary, JSON.dump, and then we'll pass in the object that we created. So boss message underscore dict. This will be serialized into a JSON object, and then we're going to pass in the file we're actually going to be passing that into, boss message. And then go ahead and save that. And if you open again your folder icon here, you will see the boss message that was serialized into a JSON. So this is basically a JSON format that was created on this file. Okay, it's looking good so far. We're almost getting there. So let's go back to our script file and move on to step 16. We're going to be scrambling the password. So now that we've safely recovered the compromised users, we're going to want to remove the password CSV file completely, and we're going to create a new with block and open the new passwords.csv in write mode, and then save that. So the Fender will actually read the new passwords, and he'll actually see our signature. So let's use another with block here. Make sure you unindent your lines. We'll call this file new passwords.csv, and we're going to be writing it to this file. So we'll pass in the W flag here, And we'll refer to this as new passwords underscore object. Pass in the colon. Go ahead and save that. Oh, there seems to be a spelling mistake somewhere. That's just because we haven't actually filled out the block yet, so don't worry about that. Okay, let's move on to step 17. Okay, for step 17, we're actually going to be writing in our signature for the /null hacker so that the Fender thinks he was behind the attack. So we need his specific signature. And we're going to save that in a variable called /null sig, and we're going to use multi-line string to set that equal to the variable. So let's go ahead and grab the whole texture, and let's create a variable called /null sig, set that equal to three quotes, so we're going to do multi-line string. Make sure you close it as well. There we go. Go ahead and save that. And looking good. Okay, we're almost done here. Now we have to actually write that into the new password object. So in this file we're actually creating, let's go ahead at the end and type in new password. So we're going to be writing into this file. So new passwords object dot write, and let's just pass in the variable we just created. So go ahead and save that. And we should be getting a new file here with a new password CSV, which contains the actual signature of /null. So that's it for today. We actually basically used a bunch of different functions that we accumulated through the lessons we had before. We were able to modify CSV files, open them, rewrite them in certain ways, and even overwrite some data as well. So this should give you a good overview of how to use a lot of the stuff you learned over time in the past 2 weeks and actually implement them in some like actual real project. So feel free to explore a little bit more on the modules that we use. CSV and JSON are quite extensive, and CSV is a very popular one that's widely used. Anyway, thank you all for watching, and I'll see you everyone next time.